How are we doing, guys? Welcome to the video. So today we've got the Cycle Frontier. We're going to be looking at the best possible settings for your system, how to get the most FPS possible, and we've got a few options depending on your needs when playing Cycle Frontier. Okay, so under the video, selected rendering device, I just leave this on default. If you do have any issues with your GPU, I would maybe then just select it on here just to make sure that it is operating off your GPU and not say like your onboard graphic card if you have one like that. But I would only muck around with this if you are having issues, and I would just advise keeping this on default. Display mode, full screen for me, that's the best for FPS and latency. But if you do have a high-end system, optimize Windows. To be honest, between full screen and Windows full screen, there isn't too much of a difference anymore. And especially if you're a content creator, streamer, and you've got multiple monitors you like to switch between, Windows full screen could be a better option for you. But if you do want the most possible FPS, full screen, especially for lower end systems, I would advise going full screen. Resolution, I always go with my native resolution, which is 1440p. I would advise going with your native for now and trying the settings below. And then if you're still having really low FPS, then maybe then start changing the resolution and going down slightly. Resolution scaling is grayed out for me. It's only because I'm using the new feature, the RTX feature DLSS for this. If you haven't got DLSS and you haven't got an RTX card, then this most probably will be non-grayed out. I would then keep this at 100. I wouldn't really want to change this. I will recommend changing this only, again, if you're suffering really badly from FPS and you're trying to get to like a 60 FPS mark or something along those lines. If it is that case, then maybe change it to around 80, 85. And then to counteract what it's going to do, which is going to make it look a lot more blurrier, which could have issues when it comes to trying to spot people in the distance, you could up the image sharpening, which doesn't really muck around with FPS. It doesn't decrease my FPS, and you could try and counter it by adding a bit of sharpening to it, so it kind of counteracts the blur. But I would leave this for now at 100 unless you really are struggling with FPS. Now, if you do have an NVIDIA RTX graphic card and you are running at 1440p or above, I highly recommend running DLSS, especially at the ultra quality. I've done some testing. When it's off, and the area I was at the time, it was 170 FPS. When I changed this to ultra quality, it actually went to 200, so I gained 30 FPS from this, and the image didn't deteriorate at all. It looked amazing. Quality, for some random reason, actually lowered my FPS, and so I wouldn't recommend going with quality. And balance was literally the same as ultra quality in terms of FPS, but lower image quality. So I would try ultra quality for now, but you could play around with this and just test the FPS yourself and see which one is more suitable for you. But for me, ultra quality was the best. I would also not advise using DLSS if you're at 1080p. I can never see a difference in FPS when I was on a 1080p monitor using DLSS, and the image quality used to be a lot worse. So it's only really for people with 1440p or over where you start seeing the benefit of DLSS. Image sharpening, we've talked about this, but I would also go into a bit more info. If you are a content creator, YouTuber who does videos, I would advise having this on 0. Image sharpening can make your videos and stream look a bit more blurry and blotchy, especially in like high dense foliage areas. Image sharpening can really muck around with the image quality, so I would definitely put this to 0 if you are a content creator. But if you're not a content creator, then you could muck around with this if you want a more sharper image. Definitely maybe put this up this. It won't affect your FPS. Max FPS, I have this on the limited, but you can have it at whatever you like. You could cap it to your monitor's refresh rate if you want to save on power, anything like that. But this one's a preference one. I like to have mine set to unlimited. FOV, another preference one, doesn't affect my FPS at all, to be honest. I could see about 1 or 2 FPS difference. If you go to 80 or lower, no, 80 is the lowest, but if you go lower than 100, the game's going to look more zoomed in, which means it's most probably going to give you an advantage to trying to spot people in the distance, but you're not going to be able to spot more people around you. When you increase your FOV, it makes you used to be able to see more of the game at once, and it's not as zoomed in. So I always like to have my FOV at the highest I possibly can, especially in survival games, so I make sure I can see as much as I possibly can. Gamma, I put this up to 2.4. This is the highest you can put it in the game. It has a lot of places in the game, especially when there's like weather effects which are really dark and the shadows are really dark, and so upping this to 2.4 helps me just be able to see in those really dark areas if there's people hiding. Accessibility options, I don't really touch with these, but I have tested a few of them just to see if there was like some FPS difference between them, and there wasn't. So if you wanted to try the colorblind settings, you're more than welcome. It's not going to affect your FPS. Video quality, auto detect I have on off, video quality custom, and then we can get into the different options here. So draw distance, I have this on low, and the reason for that is there's only actually, for me, between low to epic, about 4 to 5 FPS difference. If there's like a place where I can see greatly, then it goes down to about 7 or 8 FPS difference, but the FPS drop is not too big between low and epic. But the reason I go with low is when you go with low, it does actually remove some of the foliage at kind of like medium ranges. Not all of it, not all the type of grass, but like certain things I noticed were like popping off and just disappearing, and making it just made the ground look more bland, which in a way is a good thing for trying to spot people, and it may just help you spot people easier. So I put this to low. It doesn't seem to really affect anything else. It doesn't definitely affect the ability to spot players at different distances. I've tested this with my mate, going between low to epic, and it doesn't matter which one I go, I can see him no matter what at certain distances, so that is fine. But yeah, I would keep this at low. It gives you a bit more of a competitive advantage, I would say, and you get more FPS, so it's a win-win. Shadow quality is a big one. This does affect FPS a lot. Low, I was around 210 FPS. Epic, I was around 169 FPS, so a massive drop in FPS when you put this to epic. Medium for me is like the happy medium. It makes the shadow still look pretty good, and I only reduce my FPS by about 5 or 6, so it's not too bad. Now if you just want the maximum FPS possible, I'd go to low. You do not turn shadows off in this game, it just makes them look a bit more blotchy, and this is the other reason I put this to medium. It just made them look less blotchy, and so it's more a preference thing. But if you do want lower, if you want the highest FPS possible, put this to low. If you want a bit more visual quality, put it to medium. Right, post-processing quality, low for me. There wasn't really a difference in how the game looked, apart from it looks slightly darker at epic, and I would lose between 5 to 6 FPS. So putting this to low just gains you a good old 5 to 6 FPS, possibly higher on lower end systems. So low definitely for post-processing quality. Texture quality, this one won't affect your FPS too much depending on your graphic card. So if you have a graphic card with 6 GB of VRAM or higher, you can put this to epic and you won't see any difference between epic and low in terms of FPS and performance, no stutters or anything. Now if you are running at around 4 GB of VRAM, I'd mostly lower this to high or medium, and anything lower than 4 GB, most probably put this to low. But this one's a testing one depending on your GPU. Just see if you can handle it at high if you've got a 4 GB thing. If you're feeling like the game is stuttering a bit, or your FPS is going lower when you change this, then obviously just lower it a bit lower, a bit more. But this is very dependent on VRAM on your graphic card. But yeah, so 6 GB or higher, you should be fine with epic. Visual effects quality really affected the FPS again. Epic was 184 FPS and low was 209. Big difference, and I really couldn't really see too much of a difference in visual quality between low and epic. The only thing I did notice on epic, especially when it was like the weather effects were going, was the trees were moving about more vigorously. You know what I mean? Like moving about a lot more on epic, which, that may be something you may want, but if not, for me, low is better because the trees are moving about less, things are moving about less, and so if I see someone moving in the distance, I can catch them easier. It's more, it's a lot easier. So in a way, low is most probably better for a competitive edge, and you gain a hell of a lot more FPS. So definitely put this one on low. Foliage quality is Another one which is more of a preference thing. I didn't actually lose too much FPS. I was between 6 to 7 FPS between low to epic, and so I'll put this on epic because I do like the way there's extra grass, like the detail on the grass and stuff. That's just for me for content creating and making the game look pretty nice when I'm recording. But as I would recommend maybe putting this to low if you want a competitive edge, especially if you kill someone in a high dense grassy area. You may be able to find like the loot easier, for example, but there's not too much of a difference when it comes to actual FPS. Maybe on lower end systems it may affect it more, but yeah, low if you want in the highest FPS and competitive edge. And I put this to high to epic if you would like, you know, a more visual quality, right? Advanced options, VSync you definitely want to turn off. Show FPS. I don't like the FPS counter on this game. It's not like stable. It just like looks like it's having the spasm all the time. So I normally use the Steam FPS counter or the NVIDIA one, but you're more than welcome to turn that on if you want to. DirectX 12 is an interesting one. So I know a lot of people have had issues with DirectX 12. Personally, for me, I have not had any issues with my graphics card. Now, for me, what this will do when I enable this is I gain about 10 to 12 FPS when I go to DirectX 12. But what I also noticed is it did use a lot more VRAM. It was about 700 more VRAM. But to be honest, that's what VRAM's there for me. You know, I had extra VRAM to use, so I was quite happy to use that extra VRAM and get more FPS. But if you're someone with a lower end graphic card, 4 gigabytes of lower, I would mostly just turn this off. All right, and it's been a few problems with it. I know some people have been having crashes with DirectX 12, so if you're one of those people, maybe just turn this off. If you're not having issues, you can top this on. Motion blur, definitely turn off. I still don't know to this day why people still include motion blur in any video game. It just looks horrible, and you know, it reduces your FPS. So have this off. Enable multi-threaded rendering. Advise having this on. Only turn this off if you're running like on a really low end CPU, which is like dual core. But if you've got 4 cores or higher, I would definitely put this on. If you don't know if you got the 4 cores, I would maybe just Google your CPU and it should tell you on there. But anything below 4 cores, I would turn this off. But most modern day CPUs are above 4 cores, so I would definitely highly recommend turning this on. And then enable GPU crashing and debugging, I just have this off. Okay, moving on to the audio tab. Not really much here in terms of FPS difference. This is just preference stuff, but I can just go over a few recommendations. So music volume I normally just put a bit lower. Sound effects I always have to the maximum, and then I put dialogue a bit down just in case. I don't really know what the NPC's dialogues are. I don't know if that's like certain people in the game. I don't know if this is what this actually does, to be honest. Hit marker volume, I've put this to 75 so I can at least hear it when I hit people. And unfocused volume, I just left this at 100. Binaural audio, definitely put on. This is the one I definitely recommend making sure you have on. This is going to give you a lot more awareness with your audio and let you know if people are like above you, below you, where the baits are coming from. It's pretty nice to have that on. Voice chat, one thing I would most probably recommend is the volume here, to just keep it around 50, 55 tops, I would say. I can remember in the closed beta that if you put this up higher, like one of my friends put this up higher, and when we was trying to talk to someone in game, it was above, I think he had it above like 80 or something. It sounded so horrible in game. Like it just sounded like he was like eating his mic. It sounded really bad. And then when he lowered it down to about 50, it sounded better and you could understand him. I don't know if this is a thing still in full release, but it was a thing in closed beta. So if you are trying to talk to people in game, have this around 50 just in case, so they do understand you. And I kept incoming voice the same, so it's not like too loud if people are like trying to spam stuff in the chat or something like that. Then under the game section, The only thing I would most probably advise changing is, or if it is, I think it's defaulted to this, but definitely have this off, the field of view movement changes. I don't want my field of view changing every single time I sprint and run and stuff. I just want to keep my field of view all the same, whatever I'm doing. So I always like to turn this off. But again, it is kind of a preference thing, but I would highly most probably recommend turning this off. Okay, I'll go over also my NVIDIA settings, but I don't really think NVIDIA settings really affect your FPS as much as people may think, but we'll go over some which I do think you could change, and they do affect the cycle. So if we go to the Manage 3D settings and go to Program Settings, and just here if you click Add, you should be able to find your cycle frontier here. So I can just sit here with cycle, and then you click Add Selected Program. It could also just appear down here somewhere. Just look for the cycle. It says Prospect Windows 64 Shipping.exe. So just look for that and make sure you click that. And then under here, the only things I would definitely most probably change is anisotropic filtering. You can force this to 16x, and what this will do is just make the textures look a little bit better with really no difference in FPS. Anisotropic filtering doesn't seem to be a setting in the game. Most games do have this setting enabled where you can muck around with it in game, but for some reason they don't have that here. So you can enable it in your NVIDIA control panel and set it to 16x if you like. If you're going for pure FPS, then you could also just set this to off. The other most important one to make sure is background application max frame rate is set to off. Have that set to off. Also, low latency mode is one you can muck around with. For me, setting this to ultra does make the game feel a little bit more responsive, but I do have a high-end system and this doesn't really affect FPS for me, but it does make the game feel a little bit more responsive. If you are on a lower end system, maybe try around with this and maybe try it on, or then if not, go to off if you feel like the game's feeling a little bit stuttery when you enable this. Max frame is a big important one. Some people wonder why their game is capped at a certain FPS. Make sure you just check that the max frame rate is set to off in your NVIDIA control panel. The other thing you can set is power management mode. Make sure this is set to prefer maximum performance, and that is pretty much it. You can go and copy everything else if you'd like to from my global settings. Texture quality you can set to high performance if you'd like, but honestly guys, I'll just tell you the truth here, most of this stuff doesn't really affect your FPS too much. And it's not really going to be the end all be all on FPS as much as people like to make out it is. Vertical sync you can also make sure is off in the NVIDIA control panel if you like, but I never really see too much of a difference when mucking around with most of these settings when your games, you know, FPS wise, but the most important ones we have highlighted here. Now if you do want to make your game look a bit more brighter and the colors look a bit more brighter without losing FPS using certain overlays like the NVIDIA overlays, you can change it here under adjust desktop color settings and go down to digital vibrance. I put it to 70 and this does seem to be a nice setting for me anyway. If I go a bit higher, it looks a bit too ridiculous, like the settings look a bit too bright, but 70 is like a happy medium for me. It just makes the colors look a little bit more vibrant and nice. This won't affect FPS, so if you do want your colors looking more vibrant, you can set that here. Everything else you just want to just then click apply. One other thing you can do is go into your Steam settings if you are using the Steam version of the cycle, and at the top left here under your games and software, if you right click with Cycle Frontier, click properties, and you could disable the Steam overlay if you're not playing this with a duo or a trio. I don't even know if you need the Steam overlay to invite people. You can most probably just minimize the game and accept the invite. But this can affect FPS, especially on lower end systems. On higher end systems, again, this really won't really affect you too much. And if you want to see your FPS in game, you can also enable this to show the FPS in game. If you want to see your FPS using the Steam overlay, make sure you click this as enabled and then go over to the top here, go to settings, go to in game, and it is just around here somewhere. Yeah, in-game FPS, you can just select top left, top right, wherever you like, and click OK. But if you're not bothered about seeing your FPS from Steam and you want to get the most FPS possible, you could just right-click Cycle Frontier Properties and make sure Enable the Steam Overlay is off. But that is apart from that, that is it. I hope this really helps you with your game. Let me know in the comment section down below. Please leave a like, and I'll see you soon for some more Cycle Frontier.